In this video, we're going to be taking a look at some hugely important updates in the new version of InkStitch. So we're going to be using Inkscape to vectorize a logo, and then we are going to be using InkStitch to convert that vectorized logo into an embroidery file. So let me show you the logo in question here. So I'm going to hit File and Import. And of course, Inkscape and InkStitch are both free applications, so you can download them at absolutely no cost. And this is the logo in question. Now, the reason it looks like there's a big red X is because if we go to the View menu, Display Mode, Normal. Okay, now I do have some keyboard shortcuts that will switch between those two views, and it's Alt-Q is what I use to switch between those two views. So one thing I want to point out, this particular logo you can see has lots of artifacts, so it's not a what we call clean artwork, but Inkscape does a pretty amazing job at converting this nonetheless. So this icon right here represents the trace bitmap. If your layers area does not have that, you can click the down arrow and choose trace bitmap from there as well. So we'll go ahead and hit trace bitmap. And when we do that, we are in the brightness cutoff option, which is fine for this image. And actually a lot of our images are done this way. And then you could just move the slider and look at the live preview, and you'll see the results kind of update. If we keep going farther to the right, it'll be totally pitch black, but we'll do somewhere here in the middle. And you can play with speckles and smooth corners a little bit, but we'll go ahead and choose apply because I think that will be good enough. So now we're going to go ahead and just slide that down a little bit. So there is our original image, and this is our vectorized image. Now from here, what we need to do is we need to separate these elements because I don't want to convert all of this to embroidery stitches in one go. Now there is a function in InkStitch that will do this for us, but I'm going to show you why I choose not to use it. So let's double click anywhere on our fish, and that will take us into the node editor. And as I go in and select all of these nodes, if you look down to the bottom of the screen, it says 378 of 378 nodes selected. Now, why is this important? Well, the reason I feel like that's important is I'm going to show you if we go to extensions and we come down here to InkStitch, and then we come down here to the option, let's see right here, Tools Fill, there is Break Apart Fill Objects. Now, when we do that, currently, everything that we vectorize is just a single path. Let me show you that real quick. So you can see there's our image and there's our single path, right? So again, we're going to go to InkStitch, right here, Tools Fill, Break Apart Fill Objects. And we'll go ahead and accept the defaults here and hit Apply. And what you'll see here is now you'll see many paths that are generated. Just takes a few seconds. And now you can see all of the paths that were generated. So this part is okay, but the problem is when I double click on my fish again, you could see now just the fish alone, 1,037 nodes. Holy smokes, that's a lot of nodes. And so that's why, generally speaking, I don't use that, okay? Now, that's not to say you can, but I don't like to have 100,000 nodes for my vector artwork. So now we're back to our original 378 nodes. That's a lot more respectable. And I'm going to show you how we would do it in InkStitch. It's fairly straightforward. We come up here to Path, and we choose Break Apart. And you can see we get something similar to the result that we got with InkStitch, but you can see we have even more paths. And so what we have to do now, for example, we have the inside and the outside of our A. So you see the inside is a single path, you see that? And then the outside is a single path. Okay, so we'll just take those two pieces and we'll choose path and combine. Now here forward, we're just going to use our keyboard shortcut of Control K. So same thing here with all of these bits and pieces of the L, the P, the E, the A. We're going to select all of them and then hold our Shift key down and select this big swooshy swoosh. Okay, so now that's all, and then we're going to hit Control K, and now that's all combined into a single path. We'll go ahead and leave that as is by itself. And then up here, what we're going to do is we're going to take the outside of our fish. We're going to hold our Shift key down and select the inside of our fish. And then we're going to hold our Shift key down and select the nose of our fish, if you will, and we'll hit Control K. And then lastly, we'll go ahead and select the inside and outside of our eye, and we'll hit Control K there too. And so in the end, look what we're left with. The exact same thing that we had with InkStitch, but if I double click on my fish, you'll see that we have only 131 nodes. Quite significantly less with our nodes. And at the end of the day, I think that's better that it's that way. So it's not very hard to do with Inkscape, and we ultimately wind up with the same result than had we used kind of that automated option with InkStitch. So now we could take a look at converting to the embroidery side of things using the new version of InkStitch. Okay, so what we're going to do is we are going to go into outline mode because I want to kind of point some things out here. So we're going to start with this little tiny piece. Now, the way this new function works in InkStitch is we have to create a couple of rails. So this is the piece in question. We're dealing with path 17 here. You see that there? So this is the piece that we're going to convert. And then, so we're going to create what they call rungs. Okay? I said rails earlier, but I meant rungs. So what we have to do is we just simply have to click with our pen tool. To get to my pen tool, I just hit P on my keyboard. And you see, we just have to nip that outline there. And then we're going to come over on this side, and we're just going to nip that outline there. Okay? And that's it. That's literally all we have to do. Okay? So now we can select those two pieces. So you see what I have selected. The original path, and then our two rungs that we just added. Now, if you've watched any of my previous videos, you know that I generally suggest that you don't use rungs. But in this case, for this particular function of the new version of InkStitch, we have to use rungs. But the end result is so good that it's definitely worthwhile. So let's go up here to Extensions, InkStitch, and we'll come down here to Tools, right here, Tool Stroke, and you'll see it says Fill to Stroke, but we want Tool Satin. So we're going to take the Fill to Satin. And we click on that, and we'll just go ahead and I'm not going to select anything in this dialog box. And then we'll just go ahead and choose Apply. And we'll hit Close. And you'll notice one thing is that over here on the far right-hand side, we do no longer have our rung. For whatever reason, InkStitch did away with it. But that's okay. It's not a significant thing just yet. It may become a significant thing. But let me show you. If we go into params, so let's go into InkStitch params. And let's see what InkStitch gives us for what we just did. And you can see that we have our perfect satin, so we don't have to do any further editing, even though we only have the one rung. That's suffice good enough for InkStitch. Now, I do want to point something out in regards to rungs. So if we, and I'm just being dramatic here, but if we were to put the rung here, right, and then put a rung here, watch what's going to happen when we convert this. So we'll select them both. We'll come up to Extensions. We'll choose InkStitch. We'll come down here and we'll choose Fill to Satin. We'll hit apply, and you'll see what'll happen. Did you see what happened there? Look how wide. So see the difference in comparison? So look at how wide this is, and this also changed. And to me, it significantly changed it enough where I would not want that as my final result, because you'll see here momentarily kind of how this finishes off over here. Okay, so I am going to go ahead and undo this. Okay, and let's go back into our pen tool, and we'll just do it the other way, where we're just going to nip it there. And then we're going to come over here, and we're just going to do the same thing here. We just need to nip it. So we're just crossing that outline. You can see that there. And so now let's go ahead, select all three pieces, come here to InkStitch, Tools Satin, Fill to Satin, and hit apply. Okay, so there you go. Now we can go in and we'll go into params. Again, we lost our rung here on the right hand side, but we'll see what we get. And there we go. So we know that that conversion did happen just fine. And so we can now move on. So now let's go ahead and look at the eye here. So we're going to grab our pen tool. We're going to do the same thing. Once you've kind of used this function a little bit, you'll know exactly how many rungs you need to add. So for example, let's just back up a minute here. I think I can get by with this rung and this rung and call it a day. Okay, so let's see if that in fact does happen. So now we'll go back here to InkStitch, come down here to Tools Satin, and as long as we're here, let's talk about something real quick. You notice some of these functions, like the cut satin column function, has Shift-Alt-S as a keyboard shortcut. Now, because of this new version, this function I don't think I would hardly ever use going forward. So I might move this keyboard shortcut down to Fill to Satin because this is a tool that we'll probably use quite a bit. So we have a whole separate video on creating keyboard shortcuts that you might want to take a look at, because that ultimately will save you time. Okay, now I don't know how this conversion took place, but you do see one of our rungs is now missing. So let's go ahead and select it and see if that was sufficient information. And you can see, in fact, it is. It looks great. So we'll choose apply and quit. So that's just something that I wanted you to kind of keep in mind is, you know, you don't have to go super crazy with rungs when you're using the Fill to Satin function. And you'll just have to play with it a little bit to figure out exactly when you have to use it and when you don't. Now, this particular logo, it does really give us a really good example of various situations where the Fill to Satin function might be a little bit of a challenge. Okay, so for example, let's take a look at this. Okay, here we have two pieces that are kind of merging right here. Okay, I want satin stitches, and I want a split in the satin to happen here, and then I want to satin stitch this object. And quite honestly, I haven't played with the Fill to Satin enough to know exactly how to, quote unquote, properly resolve this particular situation. But before we get to something complicated, let's deal with something a little bit more easy. So you could see over here, these two pieces were what I would consider a relatively simple shape. Now, if we graduate, this shape is a little bit more complicated. So we're going to grab our pen tool and we're going to nip it right there at the end like we had done previously. We're going to nip it right at the end like we had done previously. But in this example, this isn't going to be enough to get the result that we want to get. Now, think of it this way. When we're adding the rungs, we're instructing InkStitch how we want our stitches to be represented. So here, when we have a mountain, typically this is how I would handle what I call a mountain, okay? So what we would do on the mountain is we would go this way with a rung, and then we'd go this way with a rung, okay? Either side of the mountain, okay? Now, down here, we kind of have a valley, right? So we're going to do it the opposite way. So we're going to go, when we're dealing with a valley, we're going to go the opposite direction, okay? And then here we have another valley. And there you go, okay? So now we've given InkStitch really good information to generate a satin stitch in the way that we would expect it to generate satin stitches. So let's see. So we'll select that piece. We'll come up here to extensions and we'll choose InkStitch, Tool Satin, and Fill to Satin. Go ahead and hit apply. And we should get the result that we expect. Okay, we'll go ahead and hit close. Now, visually, nothing seemed to have changed, but let's go into params and see what kind of satin stitches we get now. And you will see that we've got excellent satin stitches because we defined the mountain, we defined the valleys, we defined the tips, and everything is perfect. Okay, so no issues there. So when we graduate to something a little bit bigger, it's literally the exact same steps. But this one, we'll just work through it here, step by step here. So we are going to nip and tuck right there at the end. And then we're going to come all the way over here. And this is almost flat here. So we're going to nip and tuck that too. Okay, let's deal with our mountains. Deal with our mountain. So you see there's absolutely nothing special about what I'm doing. Okay, now with every mountain we typically have a valley, but this time I don't want to mess with the valleys. Okay, and in fact previously I probably didn't even need to mess with these valleys because InkStitch does do a pretty good job of kind of figuring it out. So we're going to find out if I'm right or wrong, but essentially this is a marker of stitch direction and this is a marker of stitch direction, but because there's nothing in between, InkStitch will just kind of make up its own mind what it wants to do. So let's do this. Let's do this. Let's come in here and let's select that piece. Okay. I'm going to undo that and make a copy of it. And we're going to pull over a copy. And then we're going to pull over another copy because I just kind of want to illustrate a point here. So we're going to make another copy of this. So this one, we are going to go ahead and add a couple. See, just one right down the center of each valley. And this one will give InkStitch a bit more direction. So in this case, let's go ahead and select everything. So we're going to go ahead and convert them both. And we go to Extensions, InkStitch, and we'll come down here to Tool Satin, and we'll do Fill to Satin. Okay, now visually, we didn't really see anything happen, but let's select them both, and let's see what we get. So we're going to go into Params. And visually, if you look here, we have almost identical stitches. And so that is why I wanted to kind of more or less prove to you that not necessarily do we need to go crazy with rungs. InkStitch will do a pretty decent job. If we give it kind of the beginning and the ending, it will kind of figure out the in-between, but only to a certain extent. So in other words, we could not add a rung at this end and at this end and expect to get this results because that's just a little bit too much. Okay, so we did have to have some rungs to define the mountains, but in this case, we added the rungs to define the valleys, but it really didn't make a difference, okay? So that's just something I just kind of wanted to point out for you. So let's go ahead and delete this because we no longer need that. Okay, well, I guess we do. Let me back up a few steps because apparently I did not, I accidentally moved this, okay? So now let's go ahead. I don't think this is converted now. That is not. Okay, so let's go ahead and convert that real quick. So extensions, InkStitch, Tool Satin, Fill to Satin, hit apply. And one thing I will point out, as long as we're talking about it, the Fill to Satin, we have to have a fill color. And you can see this has been converted to satin because now we don't have a fill color, we just have a stroke. And so that tells us that that's been converted. And the other things that do not have a fill have also been converted. Okay, so the eyeball and the other pieces down here, we've converted all of that. So, but we also, in order to use fill to satin, you must have rungs. It will tell you if you don't have rungs and you try to convert, it won't do it. You have to have the rungs, okay? All right, let's go back into outline mode because I feel like it's easier to demonstrate what I'm about to demonstrate in outline mode. This is the interesting thing, and a really cool thing about this new version of InkStitch is how do we handle intersections, okay? Now, this is very, very straightforward, but just kind of follow along with me here. So for this, the stitches are going to run up and down. And for this, the satin stitches are just going to flow right past this intersection. So what we need to do is we need to kind of give InkStitch some guidance about how we want to handle this intersection. And they make it super easy. So we're going to go in with our pen tool. And remember, we're hitting the P key on our keyboard. Or, you could come over here and select your pen tool, but we're just using the P key on our keyboard. And we're going to click here and click here to create a line or a rung. And we're going to click here and click here to create a rung. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create a bridge. And all a bridge is doing is connecting the two rungs. Okay. Now the angle of this is not important. We just need to make sure that the bridge is overlapping both of those lines. And so InkStitch is going to see that configuration and it's going to know then how we want the satin stitches to roll. Okay. So up here, same thing, click and click and click and click and the bridge. Okay. Now notice I did the angle more dramatically just to prove that the angle of that bridge is irrelevant. Okay, so now what do we do here? We're going to click and click and click and click, and we're going to do a bridge. Okay, and then down here, what are we going to do? Well, we want our satin stitch to flow right past this opening, so we're going to click and click, and we're going to click and click, and we're going to create a bridge. Okay, now we're not completely done here because we also need to tell InkStitch where we want to clip at particular intersections. So we told InkStitch that we want our satin to flow right here, but we want to clip it the other direction right there. Okay. Then up here, we're going to clip it right there. Okay. And then up here, we're going to clip it right there. Okay. Now notice where I'm placing that line. I'm not super close to these other lines, and that's okay. But it is important to know where we're going to put the clip because InkStitch is going to cut it right where that this line, right at that intersection point, it's going to chop it off. Okay, so I'll show you how we fix it here in a moment, but just know that's what's going to happen. So then this one, we're going to do a big old clip just like that. Okay, that's it. That is basically everything that we need. Now, remember, let's talk about mountains and valleys. Do we have mountains and valleys? Well, we kind of sort of do, right? Because look, right here at the peak of the fish's nose, what do we have? Well, if we were to turn the image, obviously we'd have a mountain. So we do need rungs at the mountains, at all mountains. Okay, so this will tell InkStitch from that stitch angle line to this one, you figure out the angle of the stitches, but then we're going to go around this corner. Okay, so we need those rungs at mountains. Now, do we need rungs here? Do we need rungs here, here, here? No, we don't need any rungs anywhere. Nope, 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 nope. Now what do we got? A valley here. Maybe we put rungs at that valley. That's a little bit of a special situation. So maybe we do go ahead and throw a couple of rungs in that valley to help InkStitch out a little bit. Then obviously we have a couple of big mountains. So we're going to help InkStitch out a little bit. Okay, we're going to tell it, kind of take it easy around that corner. And then we're going to do the same thing here. Kind of take it easy around that corner. Okay, now again, once you've used InkStitch and this new fill to satin feature, you'll know how crazy you need to go with rungs. As a general rule, you can't really add too many, but as a general rule, I'm going to suggest that we don't add more than we need either. And so all of this will convert just fine with just the rungs that we have. Okay, so at least I think it will. So I hope it will. So that's what we're going to run with. So we're going to select everything here. Okay, but there are several things that were already converted. So we're going to shift click that because we don't need that. That's already been converted. Let's see. This has been converted. This has been converted. This has not been converted, but we're not going to convert it right now. And then the eye's already been converted. Okay. So if you look and see what we actually have here, this is what we have to convert. Okay. So I just want to kind of pinpoint that out. So now if we go to extensions and we come in here to InkStitch and tool satin, the fill to satin, and we'll go ahead and hit apply, we should basically get the result that we're looking for. So we shall see. Look at here, look at here. I did make a mistake. And this is good that this happened to us because look at here. See this? We're missing all of this right here. Okay, so now let's go ahead and take a look at what we just did. But I made a mistake because I didn't put in enough rungs to define that part of the fish. And so you could see we got one heck of a mess going right there. Okay, but you can also see that everything else, that strange valley, the mountains, the mountain, all of our intersections, all of that turned out really, really good. So let's go ahead and close that out. And let's just go ahead and back up a step here. So we're going to back up to before the conversion. Let's see here, make sure that we are before the conversion. Excellent. So now we will go ahead and go back to our pen tool and add in some additional information. So we do need to define the end. Remember, we're just nipping it. And then we do need to, at a minimum, define all of our mountains. At a minimum. Here in a second, I will decide if we're also going to do anything in the valleys. But I need to look at everything from a distance a little bit and make that determination. So there's a mountain. And we're just adding a line on each side of the mountain here. And like I say, then I will figure out what we're going to do for the valleys, if anything. Okay. So let me look at this. Let me look at and make some determinations here. Okay, I have made a determination that I think InkStitch is going to do a swell job of converting all of our valleys without any additional instruction. We have our rungs at the mountains, and I feel like that's all we really need. So let's go ahead and select everything. Now we do have to hold our shift key down and deselect the pieces that have already been converted, because we don't want to convert those. Wouldn't let us do it anyhow, so we're just shift clicking and removing those objects from our original selection. Doesn't hurt to move. Oh, look there. So we didn't get everything, apparently. Somehow we didn't get the actual outline of our fish. So now you can see we have everything that we do, in fact, want to convert. So now we're good to go. So we're going to go to Extensions, InkStitch, Tools Satin, Fill to Satin. Go ahead and hit Apply, and it will make that conversion for us. Okay, so now everything's been converted. So now what we can do is we can take a look. Now, notice here how this also, we did not put in a rung there, and perhaps we should have. So I'm going to undo one more time, because you saw how much of it took off of there. So I did not nip it right there. I want to nip it right there. Okay, so my bad. So one last time, go ahead and select everything, right? And then again, we're going to deselect the objects, hold our shift key down, deselect the objects that have already been converted. And this one, because we're not converting that just yet. So there you go. So now let's go ahead and go back in and convert it for the final and last time. Good grief. And hit Apply. And you will see it will do a lovely job this time. And notice here where it clipped it quite a bit. Notice now it clipped it right where that line crossed over. And so we'll get a much better end result there. Okay, so now let's go ahead and just take a look at what we just did. So let's go ahead into params and take a look at the satin stitches that we generated. I just selected the one object that we just converted. And so you can see it did an excellent job. All of those satin stitches look exactly like we expected them to, but there is one issue here, and you can clearly see it. We have this jump stitch line from here to here, which we are going to deal with that momentarily. But you can see all of our other satin stitches, all of that looks really good. I'm happy with all of that part of it. So now all we have to do is just make a couple of adjustments. For example, here on this path, we're going to bring this in so it's inside this satin. And we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to zoom in a little bit. Okay, inside, it's just going to cross over. Okay, that might have been a little bit extreme. So I see what it did. I had both of those selected. So you can see there, we could just have the crossover like that. Okay, and then here, up here, we're going to do the same thing. We just need to come to the end, and we're going to make sure that this crosses over. And then right here, we're just going to make sure we select that very end node there. Make sure it crosses over a little bit. Now, if we want to clean these nodes up, we certainly can, because we don't need all of those nodes. In fact, I doubt we probably need any of them, and we still maintain our shape. Okay, so you can modify those or not modify those, but if you want to get rid of some nodes while you're in there, you certainly can. So back over here with this guy, same thing. We're just going to come over the satin there, and that's all we're going to do there. And then same thing here, we're going to come in here, and then right here on this one, we're going to come in, cross it over that satin. Okay, so that's it. That's all the little editing that I wanted to do there. So let's go back into params and see what we got. Excellent. So let's see. Okay, yep. So I did not select everything. So that's okay. So we can come in here And let's just go ahead and select everything that we've converted, and we'll take a look at it together. Excellent. Now, we have some issues, obviously, because what in the world is going on here with all this zigzagging back and forth? And that has to do with the sequencing of our design because of the way we went in and used to fill the satin and went ahead and did all of this. That is all going to be easily corrected, but that's kind of what the next step is involved. Okay, very easy. But notice we still have this condition right here. So we still have this condition. So let's go ahead and close this out. Now, I want to preface this by saying I don't really know how to quote unquote properly deal with this particular condition. I don't really know exactly if there's a way, an easy way of using the fill the satin tool to fix this condition. But I do know that we can still use the fill the satin tool, but we got to take one extra step. And ultimately, based on what I do know about fill the satin, what I'm about to show you is a more clear-cut way than trying to manipulate it with the fill the satin feature anyhow, in my opinion. But I don't know everything, but I do know how to fix it. So let me just show you what we're going to do. We're going to go to the pen tool, and anytime that we need to make a split, we're just going to click, right? And we're going to click. Okay? So we've done that. Now we're going to switch over to our node tool, and we're going to refine this just a little bit. We're going to put that node right there at that corner, right where we want the split to happen. Boom. That's all we're going to do. It's just kind of refine that path a little bit. And now, so we've created this. It's really going to wind up being a knife. Okay? So there's our knife. We're going to shift click our shape here that we want to split. And then if you come up here to path, and there's various options here. And one of them, you see it says cut the bottom path into pieces. So if I click division, boom, you see what happens here. We only have the two paths now, and you could see that those have in fact been perfectly split right at our knife point. Okay, so now we can go ahead and just grab our pen tool, and all we're going to do is the same as we've done previously. Nip it there, nip it there, nip it there, and nip it right there. And then we'll go ahead and select all of those bits, and only those bits. Okay, so we just have 4 pieces. Now something else is selected here. I'm not sure exactly why. There's path 100, path 99. Okay, my bad. Yes, plus the original 2. Okay, I jumped ahead of myself a little bit. So yes, we should have 6 pieces, not 4. And then if we go to extensions, InkStitch, and we are going to go tool satin, and we're going to choose the fill to satin. We'll go ahead and hit apply, and you will see that now these 2 pieces have in fact been converted to satin. So we'll select them both, and we'll take a look at those in params by themselves just to show you that what that looks like. And yes, indeed, we have our satin stitches the way we want them. All right, so we are gaining on this, but yes, this is a bit of a process. So now what I want to do is I want to set the stitch sequence order for this design so it makes a little bit more sense. So over here in our layers palette, we have a satin group, and in that satin group, we have several pieces which make up our fish. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and bring those pieces out of the satin group, like so, and we're going to just delete our satin group. Now, typically when I'm creating an embroidery design, I would go ahead, for example, like this piece right here. This is our main fish border. I might actually name that main fish border. I'm not going to go through the whole process in this video, but typically that's what I would do. Okay, and then we see we have like this is for example, I might nail this or name this tail detail bottom. Okay, something like that. So each of these pieces would have a name that I could just visually see. Tail detail top. Okay, something that I think makes sense to me. All right, and then like this piece here, we'll call it the eye. Okay, because it's the eye. And then what are we gonna do? What is this gonna be? This is gonna be the, I don't know, main fish, or let's do top fish detail. I said I wasn't gonna go through and name it all, but I think I might, just to kind of hit the point home. And this could be the middle fish detail. Okay. And then this could be the bottom fish detail. Again, this part's not necessary, but I think it is helpful. So then we'll do this piece, we'll do front top detail. And then this piece here, we will do front bottom detail. I'm just making stuff up. And then this will do, let's call it main gill detail. And this one here, we'll just call it gill detail. Okay, and then I think that is everything. So these other paths relate to the text at the bottom. Okay, so those are all the individual pieces of the fish. Now, the reason, let's maybe go into params one more time. The reason that we're getting this odd result that we're getting when we're looking at the frog situation, all the frog represents our jump stitches and trims. You will see that it got kind of a bit of a mess. And this is a common situation when we're dealing with embroidery designs that we buy that are not properly made. So just kind of remember this, and I'll show you how we're going to fix it quite easily. So let's go ahead and close this out. This is an amazing new feature in InkStitch that helps us fix that problem that we just saw. So the first thing that we have to do is we have to tell InkStitch in what order do we really want our pieces to stitch. And so this is what we're going to do. We're going to select this one, hold our shift key down and select the bottom one. And then what are we going to stitch next? Well, next we're going to do this middle detail, and then we're going to do this detail here. And then what are we going to do next? Well, next we're going to go top, bottom, and we could, these we could interchange. We could do it from the top or the bottom, really, it doesn't matter. And then we're going to do the eye, okay? And then we are going to do this small gill detail. And then we're going to do the big gill detail. And again, I'm just holding my shift key down as I'm clicking. And then we're going to do this big detail. And then we're going to do the border of our fish. And if you look here in our layers palette, everything that is related to our fish that we previously named is selected. So now that all those pieces are selected, we're going to go to extensions, and we're going to choose InkStitch, and we are going to choose the edit option, and we are going to restack objects in the order that we selected. And we're going to see now exactly, let's go into params. I'm just using my keyboard shortcut of Control-Alt-P to get into params. But now you're going to see a very, very different result than what we saw previously. You can see already how much better this looks. Now, there is still more work to do here, and I'm going to show you how to do it, but you can see it is pretty darn good, right? So with that said, let's look down here, and there's two new things that have been added that actually work amazingly well. And that is the start at the nearest point, and it says end at the nearest point. That's between objects, okay? That's between objects. So you see this tiny little jump stitch that was created between these two objects, and then it's starting at the closest point from this point to this point, okay? You see the difference there? So one thing I am going to do differently, I am not going to have this stitch in this order. I'm going to stitch from the bottom of this, and then we're going to go to this piece, then this piece, then the same order as we had previously. So we're going to choose apply and quit right now. But what we're going to do is we're just going to go from this piece, which is the tail bottom, to this piece, which is the fish bottom. So tail bottom to fish bottom. And then we're going to go to the middle fish detail. And then we're going to come here, and so on and so forth. And I'll explain why I've chosen that way when we get into it, okay? So yes, so this is a much better way of stitching out going this route, okay? So again, let's take a look at the stitch out now, because we did make a small change. So you can see now it goes from here all the way over to here. Then it takes a small jump right there, and then a small jump here, and so on and so forth. Okay? So you can see there's quite a few jumps still, but it's looking better. Okay? So we'll go ahead and choose apply and quit. Now, this is the fun part for me, and the part that I don't think people go into far enough. But there is a guy, his name is John Deere, and he is the quintessential embroidery digitizer. Been around for an eternity, has a massive following. He has a computer software that he used to be a big Wilcom guy, but he just recently, in the last year or so, released a new embroidery digitizing software called EL Designer. And if you've not seen any of his embroidery digitizing videos, highly recommend him on YouTube. Look up John Deere Legacy, and you'll see all kinds of videos of his on embroidery digitizing. And while he's using a different software, many of his basic techniques can still be applied to here inside Inkscape and InkStitch. But one thing that he does really, really well is he has lots of videos on routing and pathing. It just makes your embroidery, if a design is properly routed and pathed, it can make a huge impact on the amount of time it takes for an embroidery file to stitch and the amount of time it takes you to trim thread trims and things like that. So we are going to make a couple of changes here, and I'm going to show you how easy it is to do. So remember, we had this big, long, giant jump stitch from here all the way over to this bottom piece, right? So when we go to stitch this on our embroidery machine, it has to stop and then make that giant leap all the way over to the next piece. And if we can eliminate those, it's really a good idea to do that, because we don't want our embroidery machine to slow down, okay? We just want it to just buzz right through it, no slowing down. Okay, but this is a massive leap from, now this little tiny jump, no big deal. Boop, it just jumps. But when you have a massive leap like this from one object to the next, yeah, that's a problem. Okay, so we don't want that. So how do we fix it? Well, it's really easy. We'll select this shape. So we are in the main fish border, but we don't want to be. So we want this little guy, and we want to hold our shift key down to this little guy. So you can see those are stitching. This is going to stitch first, this is going to stitch second, but we're going to come up here to extensions, and we're going to choose InkStitch, and we're going to choose the option here to, let me find it. There it is. Tool stroke. And we're going to choose jump stitch to stroke. The reason I struggled finding it is because I usually use my keyboard shortcut of Control-Alt-J. But we'll go ahead and click that. And what this dialog box says is, it says if the jump stitch is greater than 2 millimeters, then create a running stitch. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. So let's go ahead and choose. You see it says do not connect after trim, stop, force lock stitch, etc. That's all well and good. So we may not want to have this last option checked, but let's just go ahead and hit apply and see what InkStitch does for us here. So what it did for us is it actually creates this line. Now if we go back to this view, you can see it's a dotted line, and all we're going to do is we're going to bury this line. So we just double click on it, and you see now we got a small jump stitch to that first spot, and then we're going to go here, and then we're going to go here, and we're going to bury this under the future satin stitches. And you'll see why here momentarily. This will all make sense here in a second. And notice here, we're going to change this to connect right there. Again, you're going to see what's going to happen here momentarily. Okay, and we're going to move this starting point to right here. Right, the closest connection point. Okay, this is what I think is just such a powerful option in this new version of InkStitch. So now we have this running stitch. I want to look at that running stitch by itself, because I just want to point something out here for you. So if we go into the params of the running stitch, it is going to, you notice, so it's going, this running stitch is going to be 2.5 millimeters. And so what that means for your embroidery machine, it's not going to slow down one bit. Now, there is something that's kind of weird. I hope they change it in future versions. But if we go into params, we won't see that running stitch. So that's kind of a weird thing. So you notice here, if we go into params, we do not see the running stitch. We see the original jump stitch, and we don't want that. Okay, we don't want that. So, and again, I'm not really sure I fully understand the why behind it, but it's really easy to fix. First of all, let me just show you this, just so you are aware. So when we do that, converting the jump stitch or the stroke to a jump stitch, when we do that function, and like I said, it doesn't show up in params, but if we go into simulator, it will show in simulator. So I don't know. Like I said, I don't really understand the why behind it, but you could see that running stitch is buried under the satin stitches, right? So it does show it to us there. But if we want it to show it to us in params, which normally I do, as I'll just go in and we will change it from this running stitch to a manual run stitch. So you can see here, we can just click that, and so there it is showing it to us, right? but we'll go to manual stitch. And then we will go ahead and change the max stitch length back to 2.5, which is what it was originally. And we'll go ahead and choose apply and quit. And now when we go into params, now it will show up the proper way. I say that, but it does not show up the proper way. Now that's pretty bizarre. It's still showing as a running stitch. Okay. That is pretty bizarre to me. Let me just look at this one more time. So I don't know. There must be a param that, for whatever reason, it is not doing what we actually want it to do there. Let's go back in and look at it again. Nope. So it still shows as a jump stitch. Okay. Not a huge deal, but it is something that does kind of bug me. But don't worry about it, because when you go to export it, that will export as a running stitch. So that part is okay. So let's see what else we can do here. Let's go back in here. Take a look at the design again. What else can we do in regards to the jump stitches? We just have to kind of ignore this first big one. This tiny little one we're going to ignore. We're going to ignore this little bitty one because there's nothing we can do about that. This jump stitch from here to here, we can ignore that. But what about this one? This one that is going from here all the way over to here, and then we're coming out of the eye and jumping back over to this. These I think we can clean up. So, and I think we should clean up. So let's choose apply and quit. Now, again, this isn't absolutely necessary, but if you really, in my opinion, if you really want to get down to the nitty gritty, I think this is a smart move. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take this piece here, and this is the next piece that stitches. You see that there? We're going to go into extensions, InkStitch. We are going to go to tool stroke and jump to stroke. And we're going to hit apply. And you're going to see what it's going to do here. It's going to create that little line there for us. And all we're going to do is change the direction of how this stitches. We're going to bury it underneath our satin stitches. And we're going to connect it here, like so. So at the closest connection point. And then we're at the closest connection point here as well. So we got this tiny little jump. And then it's going to be a running stitch all the way up, all the way down, and through. Okay? So that takes care of that one. But then we're going to go from the eye to this gill detail. So we're going to need the same thing. We're going to do InkStitch, tool stroke, jump stitch to stroke, choose apply. When we'll get that little jump stitch created for us. And all we're going to do here is change the starting point to match this one. And we're going to put that right on top. So these two are basically going to run in unison with one another, right on top of one another. Okay? So we'll have a little jump there. We'll have a little jump here. But then that's basically the extent of it. Now, the next thing that we have is we have a jump stitch from here to here. And we're going to bury that too. So we're going to go to extensions and we're going to choose InkStitch, and we'll go ahead and choose that jump stitch to stroke. And we're just going to bury this a little bit better inside our satin stitches. Okay, so now we buried that a little bit better inside our satin stitches. So now, in my opinion, we have gotten this design as close to what I would consider perfect as we're going to get in terms of the stitch sequence and stitch out. So let's look at it. But again, let's look at it in simulator mode, because in params, it's not going to show us all of the jump stitches that we created. And so now look at here. Notice that we just have the 3 jumps, and that was a significant improvement to what we started with. So really it's just 2, because that first frog is the start of our design. And then we're going to go with a running stitch all the way over. This is so close that it doesn't register as a jump stitch, even though, and as the same is true here, it doesn't register as a jump stitch because it's less than 2.5 millimeters. And that's why. So now we have a jump stitch, a bona fide jump stitch, right there. Probably because that's greater than 2.5 millimeters. Okay. And then we have a jump stitch here because that's greater than 2.5 millimeters. So I'm going to measure this. I'm going to measure this. I know that's less than 2.5. And I'm going to measure this just to see if, in fact, that's what we're looking at here. But then the rest of this design is all going to stitch out because all of these jumps are less than 2.5 millimeters. That's why it's not registering as a true jump stitch, even though obviously there is a jump stitch there, but it's too short to register, too short to register. So you can see this is a much cleaner design. Now what's going to happen when we stitch this out is we're going to determine ourselves what looks very obvious and glaring here on the screen. In reality, 2.5 millimeters is very tiny. So we may just not even trim this tiny little jump. Certainly that tiny little jump we wouldn't. That is microscopic. This is very, very tiny. So, like I said, 2 millimeters, 2.5 millimeters is very tiny. So we likely would not really hardly even see these little jump stitches. Really depends on the type of fabric we're stitching on too. So whether or not those, now this one, yes, this one obviously we would clip that one because it's huge. But that's just something to kind of think about. But there you go. That is what it's going to look like, and I'm quite pleased with that now. Now let's do a quick measurement on those two key points and just see what the difference is. So we hit the M key on our keyboard. That takes us into our measurement tool, and we're going to click there and here. So we're going to click and drag. I'm sorry. We're going to click here. Let's go back. Click and drag. 0.53 of a millimeter. Okay. That is absolutely microscopic. So I doubt you're going to even be able to trim that tiny little jump. Right here, we are at 1.06. Again, that's 1 millimeter. That is very tiny. And then we had a jump, a registered jump from here to here, I believe. So we must have been at 2 millimeters. It must be at 2 or 2.5. So it decided we did need a jump. Now, obviously, from here to here, we do need a jump because it's quite long. It's 9 millimeters. But this little guy, we did not have a jump. And you can see it's under 2. So I bet 2 is the threshold because we were really close to 2 over here. We were jumping from here to the center. And so it's really close to 2. So that's probably why it was showing that as a jump there. But it's still very, very close to the threshold. And then from here to here, it's not showing as a jump. Even though, that's interesting that it's not showing as a jump, because this distance from here to here, maybe it is only, it must be really close to that 2 millimeters. That must be, so from there to there, in the red, is what it's showing, 2.7 millimeters. I'm not quite sure why that's not showing as a jump, because it seems like it should be. But at any rate, that's kind of the breakdown, okay? So this new version of InkStitch is just really killer in terms of the starting and stopping at the nearest point. It works perfectly well. It does a really good job and really simplifies routing and pathing for us for sure. Now, how do we handle the text down here with the fill to Satin tool? I've watched a few videos on fill to Satin, and I've yet to see anyone really deal with any type of what I would consider quote unquote complicated scenarios. Um, so I don't know what to tell you. I will do this quickly for you, just so you could see how I would approach it, and then take these principles and apply it to all of the other lettering. Okay, and maybe what I'll do, let's do this. I'll show you the A, and then once we understand the principles over here, I'll show you how to do the E, because I think that'll be fairly easy to grasp. Okay, so to do A, what we would do is grab our pen tool, and like I said, this is the only way I can figure out how to do it. So, so what we're going to do here is we're just going to draw a line and another line. And you can see I'm very willy-nilly. It doesn't really matter. We just need 2 lines on the page. And the reason it doesn't matter is because we're going to edit the line. So we're going to be able to come right over here like so. And we're going to come right over here. And we're going to come back right there. Okay. So you can see here, I've just nipped that line. I've just nipped it. Okay. And now what we're going to do over here is we're going to do something kind of similar. We're going to come over here, and all I'm going to do is just double click to add a node, and right there at my valley. So you see there, boom, right there. Okay. And now I could adjust this a little bit. And what I'm kind of doing is I'm saying, okay, we want satin stitches right there. We want big fat satin stitches down to little skinny ones. That's essentially what I'm saying. Okay. So now we're going to take this and this. Okay. And we're going to come, remember, path and division. And then we're going to take this and this, and we're going to do path and division. Okay. So now we can go ahead and convert all of this fill to satin just like we normally would. So let's look at this real quick. So you see there, we have a tiny little space there. So remember, with fill to satin, we do need rungs. So we will just add some rungs. I think what we'll do is we'll just add one there, and we will add one here, and we won't add any over here. And let's just see how well it does converting, because honestly, I don't really know. So let's go the fill to satin, hit apply, and see what we get. And you can see we get a disaster, okay, because we missed out on a lot of our material. No worries. So that didn't work. So we have to go ahead and add in our rungs. We just have to. We got to tell it where to end. Now we have enough information. Promise you we do. So this is why we do this, so we know what we can get away with and what we can't. Okay, boom, done. So this has now been converted, and you will see that the conversion is not good. But that's okay. This is good. This is good that we got the result that we got, because essentially what it's saying here, and I can kind of see maybe why. Let's back up here. I can kind of maybe see why. So in this case, we do need more rungs. That's all that means. So now we have more rungs, and now let's try and do this. So we are going to go to InkStitch, Tool Satin, Fill to Satin. Choose Apply. We should get the results that we're looking for now. And in fact, we do. So there we go. Excellent. So now we did get the result that we expected. So what are we going to do with this little chunk? Well, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to do a rung. We are going to do a rung, and we'll go ahead and put one in the middle just for fun. Based on the information we learned the first time around, I think that's going to be required. So now we can go in, InkStitch, Tool Satin, fill to Satin. Go ahead and hit apply. Okay, so I'm not even going to look at that right now. Okay, let's look at it. No, let's not. Let's just move on. So now we're going to do this piece. So we're going to grab our pen tool and we're going to nip it right there. Excellent. And then we have a mountain, more of a valley, right? So we'll go ahead and tell it how to go around this corner. And then we will nip it over here. And that should be enough. Okay, those 4 rungs should be enough. So we'll go to InkStitch, Satin, fill to Satin, and we'll go ahead and choose Apply. Okay, so now what we're going to do is just real quick, where this comes into play, let's zoom in here a little bit so we can see what we're doing here, is we're going to, let's see here, what are we going to do here? Just trying to see exactly what we got going on here, first of all. Okay, so that is, so we're just going to overlap here, and we're going to overlap here, and then this we're going to overlap, and what are we doing down here? What's this? We're going to overlap that. All right, so I think I'm happy with that. Okay, now this here, we are overlapping. Can see that overlap, so that's fine. So we don't need to worry about that side, but this side we want to overlap a little bit. So we will overlap there. And yes, so we'll delete these extra nodes that we don't need, but we do have the overlap, so that's great. And then we have this, but you see that overlap. So yes, so all that's overlapping just a little bit. So now when I select all those pieces, we should get the satin stitch results that we're looking for. Comes around, then it does those stitches, and then finally it does those stitches, and there you go, right? And because we have that slight bit of overlap, we don't have to worry about having any gaps in between our stitches, but we get the look that we're looking to get. Okay, so I know that part of it is kind of complicated to me, just a little bit, but not terribly complicated.